What's up, guys? John Bird III here. We're back again for another video. In today's video, I wanted to do a deep dive into the Lose Bait Cashier portfolio. I got a comment from a guy on one of my previous videos that was asking about the different spool sizes or reel sizes and how do they compare to other reels. And so we're going to do a deep dive into that. We're going to talk about what is considered a 200 size reel in the Lose portfolio, what is considered a 150, what is considered a 100, and your two outliers, your 250 size and your 300. But before we dive into any of that, if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that like, subscribe button. Also, hit that notification bell. That way you can be notified whenever a new video drops and hits the channel. So here is how Lose break down their reels, and I'm going to talk to you how they compare. So Lose typically mention their spool sizes by millimeters. So 34 millimeter, 32 millimeter, 30 millimeter. Well, how does that translate into the industry? Because typically the industry talks about 200 size reels, 150 size reels, 100 size reels, and even 70 size reels. So how does that translate into the Lose portfolio? So that's what we're gonna do a deep dive. Now, Lose spool sizes typically run closer or pretty much on par with Shimano, whereas Daiwa's, their real spool sizes, if it says 200 or whatever their size is, tend to run a size up, like a size bigger. And that's just something that I've kind of noticed based on line capacities. So we're going to do a deep dive into that. So to start off, we're going to talk about the 34 millimeters frame reels within the Lose portfolio, or call them 200 size reels. So what would that be? That would be any reel that falls within the Speed Spool family. So this is the new Speed Spool RX. But any reel that falls within the Speed Spool family. So what would that be? And let me drop this tidbit for you right here. Lose also, a lot of people may have heard LFS. What did that stand for? Lighter, faster, strong. So any LFS frame reel will pretty much fall into that. So that would be like your HyperSpeeds, your Tier 1s, Gen 1 KVD, and also the new KVD Elite. That will fall in the Speed Spool family. Your Tournament Pro, that falls in that family, as well as your standard Super Duty with the flip it switch, the standard one. That will fall into that Speed Spool family. So all of those will be considered, let's call them your basic Speed Spool. So any basic Speed Spool or whatever, those will be considered your 200 size reels, but Lose often says 34 millimeters. So those are your 200 size reels. A 200 size reel will hold about 120 yards of 12-pound fluoro or 120 yards of 50-pound braid. So that is what be considered a 200 size reel. Now you have the 32 millimeters, and those reels tend to hold 110 yards of 12-pound fluoro or 110 yards of 50-pound braid. And so one thing I do want to keep in mind, I won't put this out there, braid and mono fluoro ratings tend to vary because braid lays flat, whereas the fluorocarbon doesn't lay as flat as the braid. So just keep that in mind. So there may be a little bit of variability in there, but just want to make sure we put that out there. So what would be considered a 32 millimeter or a 150 size frame reel? Again, 110 yards, 12-pound fluoro, 110 yards, 50-pound braid. That would be considered like the SLP frame you've heard in the past, which stood for super low profile. So that would be like your Gen 2 Custom Pros. Also, that would be considered your HyperMags. Where is that? Right here. Your Pro TIs. And so that would be considered, oh, here we go. Gen 2 Custom. Your Gen 2 Customs killer reel. So those, and also, can't forget this one, the all new Accel killer reel for 79 bucks. And the Accel RX, so the Accel family. So those would be considered your 150 size reels. And now going into the 30 millimeter size reels, like what would that be? Your 30 millimeter would be considered like your 100 size. So what would that look like? Gen 3 Custom with the HyperMag RX braking system. Gen 3 Custom Pro. That would be considered 100. As well as the Custom Lite. Even though it has the same frame as the Gen 2 Custom Pro, which is considered a 32, the spool size in the Custom Lite is different from this spool here. And so a 100 size reel would be considered, so you would put like 90 yards of 12-pound fluoro or 85 to 90 yards of 40-pound braid. Again, there's some variability in there depending on your braid size and stuff like that. But that's typically where it pretty much runs. Now, which reel spool size do you want to pick based on certain techniques? I'm going to give you a rundown. Now, I'm going to be honest. Best all-around spool size that Lose has to offer is the 32 millimeter. So HyperMags, if you got Gen 2 Custom Pros, your Pro TIs, that size frame right there, or spool size that will hold 110 yards of 12-pound fluoro or 110 yards of 50-pound braid, those will probably, I would say that would be the best size reel to do everything with. And I'm going to explain why. So your 200 size reels are typically it's a bigger reel, but it's not bulky, right? So it's a bigger reel that holds more line. And what you need for that, you need to use heavier baits to be able to get that line to come off the spool a lot easier, right? So deeper spools or bigger spools, it takes more inertia to get that cast out there to be able to get your bait out there. Now, there's going to be some guys that will come in the comments, oh man, I can take a 200 slinger bait 150 yards. You can't. So anyway, that's disclaimer. You can't do that. So we talking about with a 200 size reel, it's hard to throw lighter weight bait. So like a 1.5, I don't recommend throwing like a 1.5 size reel on a 200 size reel, but can you do it? Of course. Those reels like that with the bigger spools on them, it takes more to get that line to come off of the spool, right? So, but a 34 millimeter, you can throw deep cranks with it. That's great for throwing a deep crank bait, like your half-ounce spinner baits. Anything that has some weight to it to be able to really get that line off of there. You can flip with it, of course. That's fine. Or throwing a big worm, big football jig, because you're making those long casts. That is where these 34 millimeters or your 200 size reels definitely fit the best. So bigger baits, more weight, longer bomb casts. The 32 millimeters are your do all. So bladed jigs, flipping, you can still throw a football jig with it. Throwing a big swim worm, dragging a big worm, football jigs, hybrid hunters, whatever. You can do everything with that. You know what I'm saying? Carolina rigging, you can literally do everything with a 32 millimeter. And then cranking, of course, that works great for that. You can do everything with the 32. That's why I like the 32, because it falls middle of the pack and I can pretty much do anything with it. Love 32. Now, my 100s, which I say it's my custom pros, those reels, I'm gonna tell you about the experience. I had on Santee, I was throwing a custom, bombing a swim worm. And I noticed I wasn't down to my backing. I didn't have backing on the reel. I wasn't down to my knot, but I could almost see my knot a little bit. And that kind of freaked me out. So when you're throwing a big swim worm, so a Magnum swim worm, 1/4 ounce weight, long cast, like these reels aren't the best for longer casts as far as when I'm talking about line capacity on the reel. So just keep that in mind. But you can throw big swim worm with it. You throw blades. You can do everything with a 100 size reel. You just have to keep that in mind. Like whenever you're making a long cast with something like a heavier bait, you're going to cast a good bit of line off of that reel. So if you're a line capacity guy, like I want the most line I can get, realistically, you can technically get away with a 100 size reel, except for when you're throwing a big plug like a 5, 6, 8, 10 XD, because you'll cast all the lines off those reels, point blank period. Those reels aren't designed for that. So just keep that in mind. But everything else aside from that, like you'll be perfectly fine with a 100 size reel. A lot of guys talk about line capacity and be like, man, I want the most line I can get. Well, you really don't. And here's why. A lot of guys put backing on their reels. So if you got backing on your reels, let's say a quarter or halfway on a reel, so you're only putting half of your main line on the spool, do you really need all that line capacity? No. So that's kind of my point there. But for me, like the 150s, your 32 millimeters, that's my bread and butter because I can do everything with it. And I do everything with it. I throw hybrid hunters, big worms, swim worms, everything that I mentioned. I throw my top waters now on this HyperSpeed. And again, 120 yards, a 50-pound braid. And I have 50-pound braid on here, and I can slang a bait with this reel. And I pretty much have all my breaks off of that reel, and it had my spool, have my spool super loose. I can bomb a bait a long way. But that is pretty much the deep dive into the portfolio as far as loses, reels, sizes, and how they compare to other reels. Again, you want to pick the right spool size based off of the technique that you're going to do. I found for me, like cranking, like a 1.5, a gravel dog 8 and 10, any mid diving crankbait. The Custom Pro is probably the way to go, simply because of the HyperMag braking system, the HyperMag ITB, which stands for inertia transfer braking. It basically helps you really eliminate backlashes because it has a disc in there called a turbo disc that pops out at the beginning of your cast that prevents the backlash at the beginning, and towards the end of the cast, as your spool starts to slow down, it goes back in and it gives you a little bit extra distance. I have two 6/8s in the Custom Pro, and I throw 1.5s, gravel dogs, hardliner 35s, hardliner 57s, chick magnets. That's my go-to cranking reel, just simply because the lighter weight spools, so like especially with like your custom lights, with the lighter weight spools, it takes less inertia to get that bait to go. So that's why it's always good to use a 100 size for lighter baits. Crankbaits are hard to throw, especially jerk baits sometimes can be hard to throw. They don't have a weight transfer system. Those lighter weight stuff, those smaller reels are better for the lighter weight stuff because it doesn't take as much oomph. Whereas with a bigger platform reel that holds more line and that spool is deeper, you're going to need a reel to get the optimal performance. You're going to need to throw a bait that has some weight to it. And that's where I tend to lean to, for the most part, baits that have more weight with my 34 millimeters. Now, I haven't mentioned the Super Duty 300. That's a 300 size reel. I mean, that's standard. But the BB1 Pro, I haven't mentioned that. And loose portfolio, that's considered like it's a 35 millimeter, but it's more so considered like a 250. There aren't 250 size reels on the market like that. You don't hear that, but that's where the BB1 will fall. That's why I haven't mentioned that in at the beginning of my video. But because it's kind of an outlier, just like a 300 size is an outlier within itself. But just wanted to mention the 34, the 32s, and the 30 millimeters or 200, 150, 100 size reels. A lot of people get them confused, and Lose is definitely working on that. So stay tuned in the future for a lot of more Lose projects or new reels coming out in the future. But that's just pretty much a deep dive into what the Lose portfolio looks like. Now, I haven't mentioned this in the earlier parts or pretty much in any of my videos, but I link stuff down in the description, all the products that I talk about or use within my videos. I always think that stuff down in the description. So if you're ever curious about that and you've never see me leaving the links, that's where they're at. They're down in the description. But that's it for today's video. So anytime you have questions and you want to see me do a video on that, make sure you leave those down below, because that is where I'm going to go in there and I pull some of my ideas from. It's from the comment section. I've been feeling like I needed to do this type video for a while to really explain the families, kind of what reels equals 200, 150, 100, so that if you're looking for a 150 size reel, I can give you the different options there. So if you got any questions, they may turn into videos, so make sure you leave your comments down below. I'm JB3. I got to get back to living the dream. I'll catch you later.